Welcome to Righting Wrongs here at Hudgell Solicitors, the easy guide to legal issues many people may have to deal with in their lives. I'm Keith Phillips, and joining me to discuss accident at work compensation claims is Kerry Gillespie, a senior solicitor who specialises in serious and fatal injuries in the workplace. Welcome, Kerry.
Hi, Keith.
Now, fatal accidents, they are rare events, but nevertheless devastating for any family to experience. When they occur in the workplace, which quite often is meant to be a safe place of work, loved ones will rightly want to know what went wrong.
Absolutely. It's such a difficult time for any family to go through, and as much as they're dealing with this huge burden and this huge emotional loss, but like you say, absolutely, what they want to know is what went wrong, and our job at that point is to step in, investigate, and take that burden off the family.
And at some point, depending on the investigation, you will want to fight for compensation for those families as well?
Absolutely. If it's appropriate, once we've looked at the facts, then that's absolutely something that we can assist the families with.
Fatal accidents at work, are they always a result of poor health and safety culture?
The Health and Safety Executive say that 138 people were killed in the last year alone as a result of accidents at work. Now, that number is steadily declining as safety records get better, which is great, but that's still, a really high number. And
there will be important lessons to be learned from each incident.
Yeah, absolutely. The HSE do a great job in putting recommendations in place and making sure that those recommendations are then followed through, so that hopefully, as you say, lessons are learned and this doesn't happen again.
As a specialist in accidents at work, if you're looking at cases, will you be looking for any evidence of negligence by an employer?
Yes, or a colleague, for which the employer would be what's called vicariously liable, which means you could bring a claim for negligence against the employer, and as you say, if negligence is there, potentially pursue a claim for compensation.
You mentioned that 138 people were killed in accidents at work last year. Now, some sectors of work are more dangerous than others.
Absolutely. So we see construction, agriculture and manufacturing tend to be the most frequently occurring roles, but there's also higher than normal in transportation and recycling industries as well. Well,
what type of accidents are we talking about? What are the most usual ones where people actually have fatal injuries?
By far the most common, unfortunately, is falls from height. Over half the fatalities we see are people falling from height, but also being struck by moving vehicles. It could be a truck. I dealt with one with a forklift very recently. That was really awful. Struck by an object, hands, limbs trapped in moving machinery, or being something collapsing, getting trapped by something collapsing or obstructing your day-to-day business.
If families have experienced one of their loved ones being involved in a fatal accident at work, in what circumstances would they seek legal advice? I mean, does there have to be negligence by an employer?
Yes, there does. The Health and Safety at Work Act outlines what should be a safe environment for people. That's a duty on the employers, and if that duty is breached, there's negligence, and therefore we can investigate whether there's a claim for compensation.
Kerry, with your many years' experience of representing families in fatal workplace accident claims, can you give examples of where employers have been negligent?
So when somebody falls from a height, it can often be as a result of lack of scaffolding or harnessing, failure to assess a job properly, do the proper risk assessments. They can also be given, the person themselves may not have been given adequate training to do the job. They may not be wearing the right personal protective equipment. With machinery, again, that machinery might not have been maintained properly. It may not have been risk assessed properly. Again, training, it's a massive part of, unfortunately, failures on employers a lot of the time to fail to give people the right training and the adequate training or the adequate supervision as well.
Because if there are hazards in the workplace, employers should know about them and act upon them.
Absolutely. There should be risk assessments. They should know about the hazards, and they should do everything that they can reasonably can to protect you against getting injured because of those hazards.
Now, if a family is listening and they've been affected by a fatal accident at work, why is it important they should seek out specialist legal advice?
So our team of specialist lawyers here at Hudgell's, we're experienced in investigating these kind of claims. We can look really deeply into the employer's safety records. We've got experts on hand that can look into niche areas, for example, or even sometimes, if it's necessary, reconstruct an accident to see what went wrong. And
also, your team will appreciate fully how financially a fatal accident can affect a family.
Absolutely. It's never the first thing that families think of, and it's often a really horrible conversation to have with people. But ultimately, you've lost a family member, sometimes the main breadwinner in a family. So, as much as it is important to look at what went wrong, it is definitely important to investigate whether there's a compensation claim there as well.
Following a fatal accident at work, who can make a compensation claim?
Generally speaking, we're looking at husbands and wives, civil partners, sometimes people who have been cohabiting for 2 years. There's often financial dependency there and a service dependency. We can even look sometimes to former husbands and wives, and we've also represented children and other dependents who might have been dependent on that person in a different way.
And if an employer is found to be liable for negligence, how would a compensation settlement be calculated?
So it's all about looking at the loss to that family. So that could be a financial loss if that person was earning a salary and contributed to the family, but it can also be a loss of what we call services, a service dependency. So that could be childcare, DIY around the home, gardening. If that person did that and then now that person's gone, you have to pay for those services. That's something that we can calculate for you.
The loss of a pension will also be taken into consideration as well?
It will. That could be many years. Especially if you have a young person that's sadly had a fatal accident, you could be looking at 40, 50 years worth of pension contributions. And again, in some cases, they're very complex calculations. And again, we've got experts on hand to look into that.
Following a fatal death at work, there will also be an entitlement to statutory bereavement award.
Yes, a woefully low award, unfortunately, of £15,120 is paid out to if the deceased was a husband or wife, or you were a child under the age of 18 at the date of their death. It's a fixed sum, and it is shared between dependents. And also, the other thing we can look at in some cases is pain, suffering and loss of amenity, particularly if there has been a period of time between the accident and the eventual passing of the person.
And Kerry, it's not always about the compensation settlement, is it? Families will want an investigation, explanations, an answer to the questions why the accident happened. How do they go about that?
Yeah, often that's more important to families, certainly at the very beginning, and really the way to do that is an inquest. Most fatal accident cases will include an inquest, and we can assist the families with simple things like just liaising with the coroner, just taking that burden off the families. We'll, be able to look at the bundle of evidence, find the salient documents, and if absolutely appropriate, we can help represent them at inquests as well.
Well, you're an inquest lawyer. Why are inquests important in the compensation process?
An inquest looks at certain questions, so who, what, why and where. So it establishes what's happened and why it's happened, and looks at questions for stopping that happening again for the future. And that's often where families get most of their, I hesitate to call it peace of mind, but that's where generally families will find out what went wrong and why.
Now, families don't necessarily have to have legal representation at an inquest, but why would it be important?
So if they don't have representation, they may not have a right to ask questions of the coroner, or they may not get the information that we then would need to pursue a civil claim for compensation afterwards.
And does it also take the stress out of an inquest to some degree? Yeah,
having us there, it just acts as a barrier, and it takes, like you say, it takes the stress and the emotional burden off the families. Inquests can be a really scary and strange time for people, and inevitably it's the first time families have ever been through that, and it's often a help just that we can sit down and even just explaining the process to somebody and talking them through what's going to happen can often, really take the stress out of a situation for them.
Now, one other legal issue that often raises its head following a fatal accident at work is if the deceased didn't leave a will. How does legal advice help there?
So if somebody dies intestate, then you will need to get a grant of probate or a letter of administration so that you can bring a claim on behalf of the deceased death. So we can assist you through that process. If you make a mistake in applying for that process, it can put everything back months, and it can take a long time to resolve. So it's really important you get specialist advice at that point.
And it's important who exactly applies for the grant of representation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be the right person, and that person then needs to go on to pursue the compensation claim. There can only ever be one claimant pursuing a claim, so it's really important you get those things right early doors.
Now, if someone needs advice, obviously they can contact you. There's free consultation?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll always chat to families for free, and there's no upfront charges at all. And the work that we do would be on a conditional fee agreement basis as well.
Thanks, Kerry. Kerry Gillespie, Senior Associate Solicitor, specialising in serious injury and fatal accident claims here at Hudgell Solicitors. Thanks for listening to Righting Wrongs. And if you need further information regarding legal advice following an accident at work, head to our website, hudgellsolicitors.co.uk.